So the territory is one piece and one gigantic stumbling block. But then you also have to ask, okay, well, what were the underlying conditions that led to Russia's invasion? And this is again not to deny that they shouldn't have done it and all of those sorts of things.
Oh God.
But you also have to understand their perspective and what led to this aggressive action.
What?
You know, the NATO eastward expansion, that Ukraine could be part of NATO. Those
oh my God.
Conditions that led to this provocative and yes, illegal action from.
What unbelievable. I don't need to watch any more of that. If you're against like imperialism, if you're against like, you know, absorbing territory into your border, such as the case with Gaza, you know, they're talking about just like taking it. If you're against that, but you're making excuses for Russia, like it's just fully sweeping for Vladimir Putin in this spot. I mean, it's just unbelievable hypocrisy.
Buttigieg was trending after this interview because it was so bad. So let's play, and we'll do a little trivia for viewers here. We'll play this clip, and you tell us what Pete Buttigieg thinks should be American policy towards Israel. This is.
I just don't understand. I mean, like, look, he's a little verbose, but I don't think his positions were difficult to track. I don't know why people are pretending like this is word salad. It took him a minute and a half to address your question. I'm sorry he didn't address it in 5 words. It was not difficult to follow. Why are people pretending like he was speaking in these like lofty language and you don't really know what he meant, you know?
This is B7. Sorry to be out of order here.
More than half of Senate Democrats just voted to oppose the sale of over $500 million worth of U.S. bombs and guns to Israel. Would you have voted to oppose sending those weapons?
I think we need to insist that if American taxpayer funding is going to weaponry that is going to Israel, that is not going to things that shock the conscience. And
so he's very clearly, you know, without saying the words, he's very clearly saying conditions-based aid. He's very clearly saying that we need to, like, if they're not meeting certain requirements, like allowing sufficient aid into the country, or, I mean, I would go even further, like, I would leverage the, you know, arms sales and arms shipments to pressure Israel to do way more to prosecute war crimes in Israel.
And look, we see images every day that shock the conscience. So much of this is complicated. But what's not complicated is that if a child is starving because of a choice made by a government, that is unconscionable. And I think especially including voices who care about Israel, who believe in Israel's right to exist, who have stood with Israel in response to the unbelievable cruelty and terrorism of October 7th. I think there's a reason why so many of those voices are speaking up now too. Because this is not just something that is on its face and in itself a moral catastrophe. It is also a catastrophe for Israel for the long run.
How do you think?
I do not understand. What issue do people have with that? Okay, here's the issue, is he's not saying, day one, I'm going to do an arms embargo. I'm just going to completely sever a relationship that we've had with this country for the last, like, 50 years, 60 years, whatever. Whenever America stepped up and started to take a more direct relationship with Israel, I don't know when that was it 60s, 70s? I don't know. Because he didn't say that he would immediately just cut arms. Instead, he said that the aid should be conditions-based. I guess that's the problem that they have with him, is that he's not endorsing a full-on arms embargo right away. I think you can make a really strong argument that is somewhat counterintuitive, but it's still a strong argument nonetheless, that you can influence Israel and affect better outcomes by keeping them at the table. That's going to be a really tough pill to swallow for someone who believes that they're committing a genocide and that that war crimes are like a systemic policy of Israel. Because if you tell that person that we need to maintain the relationship, they're going to hear that and think like, what, do you want to support a genocide? You want to support an ethnic cleansing? But it's just facts. Like, if we just alienate and marginalize Israel, we have no say in what they do. Like, none whatsoever. We have no influence. All of that is gone. And for like, what do we get out of that? There's no indication that Netanyahu would back off of the position that he has on Gaza. I think he would still continue to do that, just with like more limited resources, right? They have the most advanced military in the entire Middle East. It's not like, they do get a lot of aid from us, but it's not like they couldn't operate independently if push came to shove. And Netanyahu has given no indication that he would be, he's just a hard guy to move. Like, he's a very intransigent guy. And it's part of the pitch, quite frankly, to Israeli voters, is that, he is going to act in their best interest and contradict American presidents if need be. But if you keep them at the table and you start doing conditions-based aid and you start doing it in that way, then you can, as we saw Biden did, and I agree that Biden was too soft, but we saw Biden use leverage to influence better outcomes many times throughout that conflict. I mean, this crowd, they don't want to acknowledge that or talk about it at all, because it sounds like they think it sounds like you're sweeping for Biden, but it's not mutually exclusive to say that Biden should have been way tougher when it came to Netanyahu, but then also say at the same time, but he did wield the influence of the American presidency to successfully move Netanyahu a number of times to allow aid into the region, to allow evacuations. And all that is just gone if you just cut the relationship off and turn, you make Netanyahu like an international pariah, and you start doing these sanctions and stuff like that. You could make an argument that the conditions for people in Gaza would get worse in that situation, because now there's just no influence. It's all gone.
I think the next administration should handle our relationship with Israel. Do you think it should change based on what Netanyahu has done the last several years?
Well, certainly Netanyahu can't be the only voice or the only compass for what should happen in the U.S.-Israel relationship. And, no matter how strongly or especially because of how strongly you might believe in Israel's right to exist and defend itself, you don't have to make excuses for the choices that Netanyahu is making, especially because they are often made not only in the name of...
He's saying the U.S. should put harsher conditions on the aid that we send to Israel, and the U.S. president should be firmer in their posture with Netanyahu. I mean, these are two perfectly acceptable answers
of the Israeli people, but in the name of a U.S. alliance. I think that we, as Israel's strongest ally and friend, you put your arm around your friend when there's something like this going on and talk about what we're prepared to do together. It certainly cannot be what we see right now from this administration and this president talking about beachfront property in Gaza before he's prepared to talk about human suffering in Gaza.
So the question started, hey, Kat.
I mean, just the answers that he gave would have been a very different kind of approach than what Biden did. It would be an approach that was way tougher on Israel. And it enraged people like Ryan Grimm and Krystal Ball, because they didn't just say straight up, arms embargo right away. Just that's it, right?
So the question started with sending weapons to Israel. So trivia question, pop quiz. How does Buttigieg feel about weapons to Israel?
That it should be more conditions-based. How did you not? Are they pretending to be dumb? Or maybe, I don't know. I'd entertain the possibility that they have extreme... you have to remember, these people fucking hate Pete Buttigieg. The searing fire of 1,000 suns level of hatred that they have of Pete Buttigieg, it goes back years, okay? They never got over Super Tuesday in 2020. They convinced themselves that he, conspired with ex-CIA friends to rig the Iowa caucuses. They convinced themselves that he, helped Canada price fix bread, like Canadian company price fix bread in Canada, which is just simply not true. Like he had no, he was not involved in that. So they fucking hate Pete Buttigieg. And then of course, he, was a part of the Biden administration, and they hate Biden. So it's possible that their own cognitive biases, prevent them from hearing what he was very clearly saying. He is a bit verbose, but he answered the question, and they're just pretending like they couldn't understand what he was saying. I tend to believe that a complete cut of the U.S.-Israel relation will push Israelis to the more extreme right-wing parties. That is for sure possible, 1,000%. If Israel feels like they've lost their most important ally. Like a big part of, I think, Israeli identity is about like this sense that, the world is out to get you. The world is out to get you. Like Zionism itself was a response to virulent anti-Semitism and a Holocaust. And, look at where they're positioned on a map, and then like look at all the other countries around them. So like there's this hyper vigilance, I think, that is like a core part of the Israeli identity. It's like they feel like they need to really fight to exist. And if America marginalizes Israel, then it's like, I feel like you're right. I feel like there's a very decent chance that the country would shift even more right wing. Also, their problem, as I get it, is that his stance isn't Israel doesn't have a right to exist. I mean, that's a part of it, right? Like that is every time he says that Israel has a right to exist and defend itself, they fight like it. I'm sure it produces a visceral, I'm sure it pisses them off every time he says that. Every normal person hears that and they're like, well, yeah, every normal person here thinks like, of course, countries have a right to like retaliate when it comes to stuff like October 7th. When they hear those words, Israel has a right to exist and defend itself, they just get like, what? They get pissed. Like, Mandela, how do you feel every time you hear somebody say that? Check the comments on Krystal Ball and Sagar's Ukraine video yesterday. Oh no, what did they do? Trump Putin Alaska summit set as Zelensky freaks. Oh my God.
President Zelensky has to get all of his everything he needs because he's going to have to get ready to sign something, and I think he is working hard to get that done. Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back, and some swapping, complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back, and we're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories.
Putin at no point has given any indication that he would be willing to cede any territory that he's taken over. So this is just a pipe dream. There's no way this is going to happen. There's no way they're going to convince Vladimir Putin and Russia to, give back territories that they've taken. It's just not going to happen.
To both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow or whatever.
Pay very close attention to what he said there about the swapping of territories. That is going to be the crux of this entire summit and whether or not it is successful. Now, let's go put this AP story up on the screen. Trump says he will meet Putin next Friday in Alaska to discuss the end of the Ukraine war. It remains up in the air whether President Zelensky will attend. Originally, they had floated a summit which was bilateral between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and then trilateral, including the Ukrainians. However, the Ukrainians are making quite a bit of noise now afterwards and drawing some red lines of their own in the sand. This entire idea of swapping territory is the one which the Russians are going to have the most trouble with, Krystal. By the way, the way this has all come about is so preposterous that, look, I mean, I generally am more supportive of Wickoff, I think, than most other members of the administration, but this is part of the problem with having a guy who's doing Gaza and in Ukraine and also previous qualifications of building the Fontainebleau Hotel in Las Vegas is basically he met with Putin. Putin was like, sure, yeah, let's end the war. I'll have a ceasefire. And that will contain basically freezing things where they are. Wickoff thought that to mean that he would be open to not just a ceasefire, but potentially giving up some territory. Putin in his comments have been like, no, that's not what we're doing. Right. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are like, hold on a second, we can have a ceasefire. By the way, Ukrainian law says that we need to have a national referendum on whether any of that's going to happen. Remember, the entire country, plus the delusional Europeans, also believe that Ukraine needs to be restored to its original borders. Including Crimea. So it's like we are basically nowhere in terms of the conflict. There's been no diplomatic resolution. At the same time, Trump has introduced these secondary sanctions on countries like India, which currently has a 50% tariff.
She's just so blasé about Russia being allowed to, take that territory and just keep it. And it feels like such a disconnect when we compare her takes on Israel and Gaza. She treats the Russian annexation of Ukrainian territories as like, hey, well, what are you going to do, right? They're this bigger military. And I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe
policy of the United States right now is all over the map. We are both in a more hawkish direction with harder sanctions than Joe Biden ever proposed. The United States is currently shipping just recently some $250 million of offensive weaponry to the Ukrainians, including the shipping of a Patriot MAP battery, which was never open under the Biden administration. And yet at the same time, we're meeting here with Putin. I mean, look, my card's on the table. I want the war to end, but that's going to require some serious compromise from the Ukrainians and the Europeans, which they have not yet been able to make. So right now, things are crazy. They are just totally ambiguous. The summit itself and how it will all come about is one which is indicative of the Trump administration, which is like flitting about basically from policy to policy. We went from berating Zelensky in the Oval saying you don't have the cards to actually does have the cards because he's getting most of what he wants. Yeah. So yeah, it's that's where we're at right now. We're meeting with Putin on Friday. We'll see what happens in Trump's words because I don't really have anything else of them.
Yeah, well, let me start with the positive. It's good. I heard it. Good. The only way you're going to be able to resolve this is through these sorts of meetings. So I will say that is a positive step in the right direction. I want to dwell a little bit on what you're saying about Wickoff because this was a major screw up from him. He appears to have completely misrepresented or misunderstood the Russian position in terms of what they were willing to quote unquote give up, which is basically they're not actually willing, at least from the outset, to give up anything. And so he misstated that, created a lot of confusion. administration had to walk it back. And, I think it's worth reassessing a lot of the Witkoff hagiography that we got at the beginning of this administration, not just because of this sort of like amateur hour fuck up with, a major high stakes negotiation such as this, but we also know at this point that with regard to Israel, Palestine, Gaza, Witkoff has not been part of the solution. At the end of the day, he has been just as much a part of undermining, towing Netanyahu's line and destroying those negotiations with Hamas as, as Trump himself and as Netanyahu. So I think it's worth us putting to bed the idea that Steve Witkoff was going to be some wild card, great negotiator, going to bring world peace. That has not been the track record that this man has, that we've seen for this man.
Originally, there was some promise, but it's like you said, especially with the Gaza, with the way that has all come about, it does raise serious questions here about Russia, the way that Russia, and the problem with the schizophrenia of the Russia policy is that you can basically look into this whatever you want. And I know I'm dwelling on this, but it's very important if you follow the details. So on the one hand, we're shipping weapons and we're taking more hawkish views than Biden. On the other, we're now meeting with Putin. But listen, I agree, I'm all for meeting, but all of the concrete policy has drifted in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
We're shipping weapons, we're doing more sanctions, and we're basically demanding that Russia pull back, from whatever it's Donetsk or whatever province exactly that they want to fully control, along with the two capitals, which they say the Ukrainians need to withdraw from. At the same time, we are not really doing much to quell the European and Ukrainian delusions that all their territory is ever coming back. Every day that the war continues, they lose territory. This is an empirical fact. And you can look at the realities of the battlefield on the ground. We could ship them everything that we don't have strapped to the ground that isn't going to start a nuclear war, and they would still lose. They would just lose slower.
Yeah.
And so that's the question of like, what material interest does the United States have in all this?
Well, and not only that, so that the territory is one piece and one gigantic stumbling block. But then you also have to ask, okay, well, what were the underlying conditions that led to Russia's invasion?
Of course.
And this is again not to deny that they shouldn't have done it and all of those sorts of things.
Oh God.
But you also have to understand their perspective and what led to this aggressive action.
Whoa.
The NATO eastward expansion, that Ukraine could be part of NATO, our efforts to pull Ukraine into a European sphere versus having Ukraine be a neutral party. Those are the underlying conditions that led to this provocative and yes, illegal action from.
What unbelievable. I don't need to watch any more of that. What unbelievable hypocrisy, especially if you're going to moralize and purity test on Gaza the way that she does, and then just to have this attitude that, think about it from Russia's perspective. Give me a fucking break. What an unbelievable hypocrisy here.
I mean, the truth is, I think we do know from the non-answer. I think if the answer was yes, we should block the weapon.
If you're against imperialism, if you're against absorbing territory into your border, such as the case with Gaza, they're talking about just taking it and permanently occupying it. If you're against that, but you're making excuses for Russia, when Vladimir Putin, when he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson, he didn't mention NATO. He gave a 45-minute lecture about how Russia had historical land rights to Ukraine. He didn't bring up NATO. She's just fully sweeping for Vladimir Putin in this spot. It's just unbelievable hypocrisy.
We would have gotten that answer. The truth is, he understands, because Pete's not a stupid guy, as we all know, he understands where the Democratic base is and wants to sort of signal his empathy for that position without actually taking a position that would put him at odds with, where some of his donor base is. And you can only, when I ask the question, who is this for? In Pete's example, we know exactly who it's for. This is donor maintenance. That's what he's doing here. And he thinks, because he's a very slippery operator, that at this point, he can get away with sort of restating the question and evincing empathy for the position without actually explaining where he is. And I hope.
He did explain what he would do. I mean, he said it, in my opinion, quite clearly. There's not really a lot of confusion about what he meant when he described, what his approach is with Israel would be.
What he, and I hope everybody else is learning, is that is not going to cut it. And there's so much about his answer, Ryan, that just disgusts me. First of all, Palestinians are being murdered every day, and we still have to center what's good for Israel. Can we?
I'm sorry, Ukrainians are being murdered every day, and we have to center what we think about Russia? She's doing more. She's giving more charitability to Russia, which is an adversarial nation that is invested in the downfall of Western liberalism. She's doing more to meet Putin where he's at without giving any kind of consideration to how to navigate a relationship that America has had for several decades. It's not some small, straightforward, quick thing to just unwind a diplomatic partnership such as the one that we have with Israel. That is something that requires a lot of thought and a lot of consideration and a lot of complexity.
Can we just care that babies are being starved to death and that our government is complicit? Can we just care about the fact that people are being massacred just trying to seek aid every day in the Gaza Strip? Is that okay, or do I need to worry first?
The moralizing here is just, it's especially pathetic compared with her coverage of Russia-Ukraine. I guess there's no thought to the Ukrainians that are suffering this grave and murderous injustice that Russia is enacting on their smaller neighbor.
About how Israelis are feeling about this and what this means for the future of Israel. I find that posture to be morally grotesque at this point. Second of all, and it ties.
I find her Ukraine position to be grotesque, to be quite frank with you. crazy.
Into that, moral atrocity, in my opinion, is this idea that it's just Netanyahu who's the problem and he can't be the only voice here. Oh, really? Well, he's not the only voice.
Why would you give charitability to Russia? Like more charitability to Russia than to Israel. Israel was 1,000 times more justified in taking military action against Hamas than Russia was to take military action against Ukrainians. Russia had no justification to take military action against Ukrainians, to go in there and just take territory and kill over 100,000 Ukrainians at this point. They had no justification whatsoever. At least Israel can say, 2,000 Hamas militants went into Israel and murdered hundreds of innocent people. Daz Vidani with $5 question: if the situation on the ground in Israel, Palestine was the same, but the USA backed Palestine over Israel, would they be pro-Palestine? Oh, I don't. We're getting into I have no idea how to answer that question.
The poll you look at says, you know what, Israeli society, they're on board with this. By and large, now there are some that, okay, how should we approach the hostage? There is some dissent, but by and large, do they care about what is being done to Palestinians? By and large, the answer is no. Not to mention, the people who are really driving the ship oftentimes in terms of Netanyahu's coalition are the most psycho extremists, Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Not to mention the so-called opposition figures who are supposedly more moderate say equally horrific and genocidal things. This idea that liberals love to hold on to, that it's just the fascist Netanyahu who's the problem. If we just got him out of there, then everything could revert to normal, is a lie. I mean, I can't say it's a fantasy because I don't believe that he believes that. It's just a total.
I mean, I don't know what liberals are saying, that all the problems would go away if we replace Netanyahu. Who's saying that? That would certainly help if we could replace him with someone more reasonable. It would certainly help. It wouldn't fix the issue. I don't know who's saying every problem would just go away. Who's saying that?
Total and complete lie that he thinks allows him to maintain what is now a completely untenable position of thinking that liberalism and Zionism can coexist.
And to that point, in polls for the next Israeli government, of the top four, you got Netanyahu, and then the three below that. The three below are true Netanyahu's right. So this idea that you're going to moderate, that he doesn't represent the full spectrum is just not accurate. A bunch of things jumped out in that quote. One of them was this fear he has of naming Israel.
Right. All this passive language.
One of his quotes was, if a child is starving because of a choice made by a government. A government. Which government? Which government is that? And I think I've seen you make this point, and I'm seeing normally Democrats who Gaza is not a top issue for them making it also, which is that they want to see somebody good on this issue because they don't want children starved. But more importantly, they want somebody who has moral fiber. And they believe that this is a proxy, that if they're willing to stand up against the special interests that are pushing them to be bad on this issue, and they're still good on it, they're still willing to stand up, then that means they're going to be willing to stand up for democracy. They're going to be willing to stand up for people. Ta-Nehisi Coates had the great line that says, if you can't draw a line of genocide, why should I trust that you're actually going to stand up for democracy? And I think that's
exactly right.
When people hear him say a child starving because of a choice made by a government, you sound scared. You sound weak. And we don't want scared and weak people now. And your point about restating the question is a good one too. And in the next clip, he does precisely that. I hadn't noticed that tick until you mentioned it, but here, let's play B7B, where he's asked about recognition of a Palestinian state.
Do you think it's time to recognize a Palestinian state?
I think that's a profound question that arouses a lot of the biggest problems that have happened with Israel's survival, or Israel's right to survival in the diplomatic scene. And many of the people who have taken that step historically have done so for different reasons than what we see happening with European countries. I think we need to step back, and we need to do whatever it takes to ensure that there is a real two-state solution, and that no one, not even the likes of Netanyahu, can veto the international community's commitment to a two-state solution where you have Palestinians and Israelis living with safety, with security, with rights. I believe that can happen, but we have to actually show some commitment to it.
I'm pretty unambiguously endorsing a statehood for Palestinians. Is their problem is that he doesn't endorse a one state? Is that what they're going to do here?
So that's a profound question. Yeah,
my Pete hatred is so vindicated.
Yes.
It's so vindicated.
Luckily, I don't know if Pete can overcome the demographic hurdles that he has to deal with in the primary in 2028. So I don't think he'll be the nominee. So thankfully we can, but honestly, guys, if he becomes the nominee, oh my God, we can all see it, right? If he becomes the nominee, I mean, it would be really bad. It would be really, really, really bad. I think that lefties would go after him more viciously than the way they went after Hillary in 2016. I think it would be more elevated. Again, thankfully, I don't know if he can overcome these problems with black voters and older voters. I just don't know if he can do that. But if we do live in the universe where he becomes the nominee in 2028, it's fucking over, boys. It's over. None of these people will have learned the lesson of this second Trump presidency and like all the awful things that have happened, like none of these people will have learned the lesson. They're going to actively work against him if he becomes the nominee. It's going to be a complete shit show.
Yeah, it's a profound question that arouses a lot of the biggest questions, Ryan. That's what that is.
That's what that is.
Cool, thanks.
So Ro Khanna, who has been floated as a 2028 candidate, did not appreciate that response. You can put it the next element. He says, I respect Pete. He diverges from you there. He says, I respect Pete, but we need moral clarity, not status quo. Yes, John Favreau, Dems should have voted for the Sanders Amendment. So there's an answer to the question. Yes, Dems should join my letter recognizing a Palestinian state. Again, an answer to the question. Yes, Trump and Biden disastrously failed on Gaza, and we need a new human rights-centered vision. So if you believe that Khanna is testing the waters for 2028, his political sensibilities are sensing here that there is a lane here, that you can go after Trump and Biden here, and you can stand up here, you can go after other Democrats, and that Democratic voters will be with you. You think I can't think of anybody else who's kind of,
if we're imagining some like insurgent, like leftist or leftist adjacent candidate who runs in 2028 and makes like Israel-Palestine the centerpiece of their campaign, I don't know if that's going to be, I mean, it just really depends on what happens, but I don't think that it's likely that in 2028 Democratic primary voters are going to be, principally concerned about Israel, Gaza. I think they're going to be thinking about like inflation, unemployment. They're going to be thinking about like Donald Trump, and it's not like they're not going to be thinking about Gaza. It's just like I don't know if this is going to be the thing that primarily motivates a large or even meaningful percentage of voters.
have dipped their toes in these waters, who's being more clear than him, which is kind of disturbing.
Yeah, and and I personally think Roe needs to go farther. I think he needs to acknowledge the international consensus that it's a genocide. So even with him, I think people, to your point, they don't want to see you tiptoeing around, right? They don't want to feel like they're getting weaselly slippery answers, which is what you get overwhelmingly with Pete. And Roe is miles better. Like it's not included. I think you're right. He is leading in terms of the candidates who are sort of positioning themselves for 2028, and his approach of this issue. It seems to have some understanding of the way that this is functioning as a moral litmus test, even above and beyond the horrors that we see.
Like, how does it benefit us as a party? How does it benefit us as a country? And how does it benefit Gaza to wage this like piping hot intra-party, intra-left civil war on this issue? How does it make anything better? There are ideological differences within the big tent of the Democratic Party. That's just unavoidable. It's going to happen. But to take it to the extent that people like Krystal are taking it, where they're not content for it to just be like a debate within the party. They want this to be a defining moment. They want this to be the defining issue of the Democratic Party. And so I just ask again, how does it benefit the party? How does it benefit our country? And how does it benefit Gaza? What is the desired outcome here? Because if you're going to tell me my desired outcome is to completely reshape the Democratic Party to be in my image, where people are using very specific language when they talk about the conflict, I will only align myself with people who just endorse a blanket arms embargo and endorse a policy of marginalizing Israel and severing our relationship with them altogether. And I will go to war with anybody who doesn't have that particular like set of, I mean, you just heard it a moment ago, like Roe, I think, has all of the positions that she's asking for, but he doesn't want to call it a genocide. And she still is like, how does it benefit like anyone? Like what, if you think you're going to completely reshape the party, it's just, that is not, quite frankly, it is not going to happen. It is not going to happen. I think what's far likelier to happen is really divides the coalition along an issue that is extremely complex and very delicate for a number of reasons, with no likely beneficial outcome. There's no like promise there of something that would benefit anything.
With Gaza. But, it also, I think what is notable in particular about Roe's tweet is not just he directly answers the question, that's kind of nice, but then he says it's Trump and Biden. And I do think part of the reason that some Democrats are tying themselves into knots and not wanting to, take these votes or give direct answers or whatever is because they're implicated. And they don't want to say, you know what, they were right, Biden and Harris were complicit in a genocide. I mean, that's a tough pill for them to swallow. And then they have to go back and look at, well, what votes did I take during that time period? And what is my responsibility to make right for my own complicity here? And I think that is, separate and apart from the money and the influence of that, which is obviously very, very real. I think there's also a lack of desire to look backwards, take accountability for one's actions, and critically to have responsibility for ending this going forward. Because if you say it's a genocide, then that would indicate, as someone who is in an elected position of power, you have a lot of responsibility, especially given our government support for that genocide, to go above and beyond the call of duty to try to end these wars. And I think that many of these Democrats don't want that responsibility on their shoulders, that historic weight, because that's what it is, to rest on their shoulders.
And from a pure cynical political perspective, the numbers make it not difficult. I mentioned that 8% earlier. We can put up B9 here. Here's a tweet from Anel Shalin, who was one of the State Department resignees who resigned in protest. So this is 32% of Americans approving of Israel's military actions. Among Democrats, the number is down to 8%, and among independents, the number is 25%. And people who, among Republicans, it's 71%. If you look at young Republicans, it's way down. Among that 25% of independents, you're going to have a decent number of people who are older Republicans but call themselves independents.
I have the Jew with $5. This feels like a completely different person than who you had on Live and Learn in the last few videos you've reviewed. I mean, I just, from what I've observed, she's very, very radicalized on this particular issue and is willing to go to war over this issue. But the issue that I have and that I keep alluding to is just there doesn't feel like there's this doesn't feel like a well thought out strategy. It doesn't feel like a calculation. It just feels like it's very kind of, it seems to be driven primarily by like rage, moral indignation, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of thought of the potential like downsides to provoking an intra-left civil war over this issue at a time where, MAGA is this like large looming threat that cannot be allowed to continue. Like, people want to dismiss this thing that I'm about to bring up, but the fucking projected dead from USAID cuts, it's amazing to me that we just nobody talks about that anymore. Why is that not a conversation that is why is that not a conversation that it's because like with Gaza, smartphones with fucking high definition cameras are ubiquitous. And so we're seeing the consequences of that violent conflict day in, day out. And these are horrifying images that we're seeing, like anybody who sees an image of like a dead child being pulled out of rubble, they're going to have a reaction to that. They're going to be affected by that emotionally. But we don't see a similar level of, it's like, we don't have like gangs of people running around Sudan recording mothers that are literally watching their babies starve to death because we stopped sending them aid. And that's happening right now. Right now, we have these extremely vulnerable communities in countries all over the world that were being held afloat by USAID programs. And those programs are just ending. And then this group comes out and projects 14 million people dead. That's 7 times the size of Gaza. 7 Gazas dead in the next 10 years because of these cuts. That happened specifically because Donald Trump won and then did that. His government did that. They just got rid of all that aid. That's a conversation we just stopped having on the left. Really? How did we just move on from that? 14 million dead? We're talking about a number that eclipses vastly eclipses like every modern war. It's obviously completely fine to not only fine, it's necessary. Like, Palestinians deserve people that are advocating for them. They need that. They need movements in different countries that would pressure politicians to take more firm action and take more steps to limit the death and suffering in that country. If nobody speaks up for them, it's going to be even worse for them. So that the role of that activism is so important. But I just, it's somehow, we just stopped talking about the 14 million people dead from USAID cuts, and we just stopped talking about this. And you want to draw these hard lines the way that she does over Gaza, but then like her position on Ukraine is like fucking disgusting. It blows me away. Are you making the abortion argument for USAID? What are you talking about? What the fuck are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. You're saying 14 million. There was the Lancet group. There was a group that came out and projected the amount of people that would die in the next 10 years because of these cuts, and they projected 14 million. Bananas. I mean, and whatever. Like,
and pollsters understand this phenomenon. There's the same with Democrats. Like, there's a portion of people who call themselves independents who operate just like partisan Democrats, and same with partisan Republicans. So true independents, the number's going to be much less than 25%. But among Democrats, 8% support. that is, politicians are always looking for 70-30 issues or 80-20 issues. It's rare to get a 92-8 issue where most of their opponents or their adversaries in the primary are.
Yes, people have started dying. Yes, babies have started dying in Sudan. There's already reporting about how mothers are literally watching their babies starve to death while they are powerless to stop it because we stopped sending aid. It's already happening.
Are with the 8%.
Yeah.
This is a chance to be with the 92.
Chance of a lifetime for someone.
There's such a thing as political gravity that is going to bring this all down at some point.
I feel like that. I do feel like that. And, there's a kind of a built way conventional wisdom that, foreign policy doesn't really matter. People don't vote based on foreign policy. I don't really know how you live through the fallout from the Iraq War and continue to hold that view, let alone, prior to our time, the Vietnam War, and still feel, people don't really care about foreign policy.
Well, lest we forget, George W. Bush won re-election in 2004, several months after the public had turned on that war, and that wasn't enough to change people's minds to vote for Kerry. He was re-elected. People didn't vote for Barack Obama primarily because of his position on the Iraq War. Like it's just an established truth about American voters that they don't go to vote in midterms and they don't go to vote in presidential elections based on foreign policy. It's just not really, like, they tried to make foreign policy like a big deal in 2016 with like the Benghazi stuff, but this is just a fact. And I don't know if she's just denying reality here. It sounds like she is. I think she thinks that, like 50% of 50% of like midterm voters are going to be like principally motivated by Israel Gaza. And I just have no idea what she's basing that off of. And the only thing that I can think of is that this is just quite simply a product of her being in an echo chamber and in kind of a bubble. Like everyone that she follows on Twitter probably talks about this issue every day, and she's extrapolating from her experience. And I think she thinks like the whole country's on fire right now because of Israel. And I just don't think a lot of people are thinking about this issue every day. There's just not a lot of strong evidence to suggest that.
Because not only is it important in terms of, international stability and young men in particular being sent off to fight and die in these wars by, mostly rich people sitting in Washington, D.C., but it does speak to these larger moral questions. And on the Democratic side, it really exposes the hypocrisy about a party that tries to position itself as the champion of democracy and liberal human rights, that you're still standing in lockstep with this rogue nation.
You are standing in lockstep with Vladimir Putin. Like literally, you are standing in lockstep with Vladimir Putin. You fucking blamed NATO for Putin on a video just yesterday. That's why I cannot stand. She takes it to such an extreme degree. The discussion about Israel Gaza. She is like telling her viewers day in and day out, we are the ones that actually care about this issue. And everybody out there, they're fucking evil and they have no morals and they're complicit and they're murderous and they hate brown people and they hate Palestinians. And we're like, look at us, like we're so much better. But also, can you really blame Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine? I mean, come on, look what NATO is doing, committing genocide and, bombarding all of its neighbors in this hyper-aggressive fashion that we're actively, supporting and participating in. And on the Republican side, it really exposes the hypocrisy of the idea that this administration would be America first and that American interests would be the priority first and foremost. So, and in both instances, it really serves as a litmus test for who is willing to have a shred of integrity or stand on principle, even when there is organized money and other, social and cultural interests that are aligned against you. And, so far, the overwhelming number of politicians in both parties at this point are failing that test.
Hey, if you like that video.
Yeah, I don't know, guy. I'm really worried about these midterms, guys. I am so worried about these midterms. I see no evidence that their movement is letting up, losing any steam. I think these people are primarily driven by grievance and rage. I think it's a very destructive movement. That's what I'm seeing. Hutch, you are disgusting, dude. You won't even demand anything for Gaza, but you would demand for Sudan. Are you real? They are just brown people to you. You never cared, even if you care about a genocide. That's crazy, bro. That's crazy. Polling on Israel-Palestine is cratering for Dems, Indies, and now even Republicans. I mean, there's certainly a shift. I mean, we can observe this shift, right? The question is like, what does that mean? And what conclusions should we draw from that? And, where do we go from here? If you ask Krystal, she's going to say, now is the time to wage a piping hot intra-party civil war over this issue and wage war on any Democrat You had Pete Buttigieg get up there and say, we need to do more conditions on the aid that we send them. We need to be tougher with Netanyahu, and we need to tirelessly push for international pressure for the establishment of a Palestinian state. And she's ready to go to war with Pete. She thinks he's like a demon. She thinks he's a literal demon. That's what I mean when I say a war. That's what I mean when I say an intra-party civil war. The chances are that whoever the nominee is in 2028, they're probably going to be using the same language. Whoever the Democratic nominee is, they're probably going to be using very similar language. And what do we think is going to happen when that happens? Like, what do we think the response is going to be from the BPL, the Black Pill Left? Like, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to do everything they can to tank the nominee again. They're going to do it again. They're going to keep doing it. It's going to keep getting worse. That's my point. The situation is worsening. It's deteriorating. It's not getting better. They're getting angrier and angrier with every year that passes. It's just the worst time to make this particular issue a lightning rod issue that provokes a civil war. It's just not, it's not a great situation. What's the solution then? I got bad news for you, bro. There is no solution right now. There's nothing we can do. Donald Trump is president. Bibi Netanyahu knows that he can get away with anything, literally anything. He knows that Donald Trump is not going to push back against anything. Donald Trump is not going to like try to force them to allow aid into the country. And to be quite frank with you, Palestinians in Gaza are fucked right now. And there's nothing we can do. You want to talk about doom or pill? This was Contra's whole point. We had an opportunity with Kamala where I think it's obvious that she would have been tougher on Netanyahu than Biden was. And she certainly would not have tolerated or proposed like pushing Palestinians permanently out of the country. And that's gone. That ship has sailed. Donald Trump is the guy that is in charge of government. Good luck. If you want to protest to try to influence him to be tougher on Netanyahu, there's nothing stopping you. You can start doing it right now. You can start protesting outside of the White House right now. Good luck, though. I doubt it. Seems like the chances are pretty decent that by the time we get to 2028, Netanyahu will have fulfilled his promise to relocate Palestinians and just take over Gaza. Seems reasonably likely that that's going to happen before the next election. And there's really nothing we can do about it. I don't know what to tell you guys. It's fucking really bad. It's horrible. It's a catastrophe. It's funny because like I feel like a couple months ago I was like, yeah, fucking coalition building. No. And I just like I'm seeing like the same behavior. It's the same behavior and it's getting worse and it's getting angrier. And I think we need to start thinking about this stuff now. So that when we get to the point where we're like 4 months removed from the midterms, it's not going to surprise us or take us off guard that these same people in lefty media are, you know, actively, whatever they want to say about what they're doing is whatever, but they're going to actively work to help Republicans like maybe keep their majority in the House. And, you know, they're going to actively work to help JD Vance win again in 2028. And I just, you know, I just think like every year that goes by, the stakes get higher and higher. And it just, I don't know how we're supposed to just like not talk about this issue. Big issue.